So in Spanish, the future tense, also called el futuro if you're saying in Spanish, basically talks about actions that haven't happened yet or actions that are happening in the future. So some examples are here. The first one is we will go to the beach, so it's something that hasn't happened yet, and you'll see the word will is very important in the sentence. And then our second example is I will do my homework. So this is our second example, also with the word will, and that indicates in English at least that it's happening in the future. So there's also a way to say it in Spanish. So previously we have said voy a to indicate that it's the future tense or something's happening in the future. Voy a means I'm going to. And then we follow this with an infinitive verb to explain an action that we are going to do. However, there's actually also a separate tense to describe things that are happening in the future, so we can actually conjugate the infinitive verb instead of saying voy a before that verb to also indicate the exact same thing, that something's happening in the future. Moving on to conjugating in the future tense, previously for both the present and preterite tenses, the conjugation will depend on the type of verb, so whether it's an AR verb, ER verb, or IR verb. However, for the future tense, it's actually different, where the conjugation doesn't depend on the type of verb, so it will only depend on the person doing the action in the future. And for these conjugations, we have that for every verb in the yo form, the ending is going to be a. 2, it will be as. Most of these have an accent. El, ella, and usted will be a. Nosotros and nosotras will be hemos. And if it's ellos or ellas, then it will be on. So for some examples, we're going to be using this first sentence here, which says seré doctora. So when you're conjugating in the future, unlike the present and preterite, you actually keep the infinitive verb and then tack the ending on to that infinitive verb, with where in the preterite and present tense, you're actually getting rid of the AR, ER, or IR ending and then adding the conjugation. For the future tense, you're not getting rid of that ending. So you'll see the entire infinitive verb in the conjugation. So this example says seré doctora. So the actual infinitive stem is here. We have the verb ser, and then you can see the ending is tacked on, and it's an a ending. So this corresponds to the yo. So this means I will be a doctor. The next example says comerá después de nadar. So we have the infinitive of comer, and that means to eat, and then we have the ending tacked on, which is a. This a ending corresponds to the el, ella, or usted. So this means that he or she will eat after swimming. So the subjunctive mood usually explains desires or hypotheticals, really anything that's uncertain or hasn't happened yet. And it's used with the future tense because the future tense describes something that hasn't happened yet or something in the future. And this means that it's uncertain. So that's why we use the subjunctive tense alongside the future tense. So some common phrases that you'll see when you're using subjunctive with the future tense are the following. So the first one that we have is para que, and this means so that. An example sentence would be the following. So we can say te lo explicaré para que. Whoops. Para que, that's our phrase, entiendas. So this one is going to trigger the subjunctive, and here we actually also see an indication of the future tense. So this means I will explain it to you so that you understand. So basically for this sentence, we're talking about something that you want to happen as a result. So we want the person to understand, and that means that it didn't necessarily happen yet, so it is uncertain. So that is why we're using the subjunctive here. The second instance or phrase of the subjunctive is cuando, which means when. So we've seen this before many times. It's a very common word, actually not used in the subjunctive, but there are some times when we do use it in the subjunctive, and that's when we're talking about something that's uncertain. So this thing in red here is an example of using it not in the subjunctive. So the example says, comemos la comida cuando vamos a España. So this means we eat the food when we go to Spain. And the reason that this isn't subjunctive is because it's explaining an event that's reoccurring, in which some of the instances of this event have already taken place, and that implies that this event is certain, that it does happen, and we only use subjunctive when we're talking about uncertain events. So looking at this other sentence in blue, where we do use the subjunctive, this says, comeremos la comida cuando vayamos a España. And here we see that this is the future tense, comeremos, so the nosotros form, and this is vayamos, so as we can see, this is the subjunctive form of the vamos that we see right here. So this says, we will eat the food when we go to Spain. So we will eat is in the future tense, so that triggers the subjunctive that we see here with vayamos. So this next example is después de que, so that's our third example, and basically the important word here in this phrase is the que. So originally después de is used for in any time frame to just say after. So our first example here, and we're actually going to start with this. So this says, comemos después de nadar. So this just says, we eat after swimming. So that's used in the present tense, talking about a recurring event. So like, we always eat after swimming. And then our second example that we have here is comeremos después de nadar. So this indicates the future tense in the nosotros form. So this means that we will eat after swimming. So this is also using the infinitive of nadar, where it's not conjugated. And the reason why the verb is not conjugated is because it comes after this preposition, which is de, that we see right here. Anytime a verb is directly after a preposition, it has to be in the infinitive form. That's just a rule in Spanish. So when you actually add the que, so después de que, what you're doing is you're putting space between the preposition, which is de, and the verb, so nadar in this case. So that means that you have to conjugate the verb. So in this case, we are conjugating it in the subjunctive. So we're going to see this example where it says, comeremos después de que nademos. So we have comeremos, which is the future, and then después de que, we see here. So that's separating the preposition from the verb. And then because it's separated, we're going to have to conjugate the verb, and we conjugate it in the subjunctive because here we are using the future tense. So that means that it is uncertain. So these last two examples are antes de que and hasta que. So these are very similar to the después de que. Basically, antes de que is just the same exact thing, except instead of saying after, it just means before. So we could say, comeremos antes de que nademos. So it's basically conjugated the same exact way. For hasta que, we don't have a preposition, and the reason for this is because for both después and antes de, so después de and antes de, we need a preposition because both the después and antes are actually adverbs until you add the preposition of de, making después de one preposition and antes de one preposition of before and after. However, unlike these two, hasta is actually its own preposition. So when we're conjugating it regularly, we would say hasta and then the infinitive, because hasta is a preposition, and that is the rule. However, when we're saying hasta que, we just use the conjugated form because que is separating the preposition and the infinitive verb. So here we can use the same exact sample sentence as previously here, where we can say comeremos hasta que nademos. So comeremos is the future tense for nosotros, and then we have the hasta que. So then we conjugate the verb, and then we get nademos, and this is the subjunctive in the nosotros form. Okay, that will be it for the introduction to future tense and subjunctive. Hope this helped.